back to the One Chart at a Time video series. I'm your host, John Schwabish. Now, we are in the midst of this first category of graph types that we use to compare categories from one group to another group. And many of these data visualization types are in some ways sort of abstract, right? We use bars, or we use squares, or we use circles, and they don't really allow us to quote unquote see people in our data. But in today's video, we're going to talk about isotype charts, unit charts, and icon charts, ways in which we can use images of people or objects or shapes, which in some ways can help our reader or our user or audience member connect visually with the data in ways that maybe some of these more abstract forms and shapes don't enable us to do. So to help us understand how to use, for example, an isotype chart and what it means and where it came from, I'm really excited to have Nigel Holmes on the show. Nigel, of course, is a famous information visualization expert from Time magazine back through the 1980s and through today. So I hope you really enjoy today's video as Nigel explains what the isotype chart is, what the icon chart is, and how to use it. Nigel, over to you.
Unit charts are sometimes referred to as isotypes. And indeed, the two are related, but they differ in this important way. Isotype is a graphic charting method with its initial letters spelling out International System of Typographic Picture Education. The system uses little pictures of people and commodities lined up in rows to show differences in the quantities of those things. The principal rule of the system is that if a pictorial system of a farmer, say, stands for one farmer, then two farmers must be represented by two identical symbols, not a bigger farmer twice the size of the original. Besides, what exactly is twice the size? Certainly not twice the height. Put more simply by Otto Neurath, who coined the name isotype in the 1920s, a larger quantity is represented by a larger number of symbols rather than a larger symbol. Neurath developed the system, first called the Vienna method, from earlier sources. Now, unit charts use the same system of lining up symbols to represent quantities, but the symbols are generally abstract shapes, such as circles and squares. There are two reasons for this. First, many things you need to show in a chart aren't easily pictured symbolically, such as bonds, stocks, or ETFs. And second, drawing pictorial icons of anything is harder than simply using circles and squares, which are readily available in today's charting software. Abstract symbols are useful when you have to show large quantities of commodities or people in a defined space, meaning that if they were pictorial symbols in that same space, they would be impossibly small. And 1,000 little abstract dots on a page does make an impressive graphic when you want to show actual numbers, even if you have to say what the dots represent. Neurath wanted his charts to be pictorial whenever possible. But for an icon of a farmer or a factory to be visible, it needs to be larger than a simple dot. So when dealing with large quantities, he would often make one of his icons stand for a larger number. One icon of a factory worker, for example, might represent 1,000 factory workers, meaning 100 icons represent 100,000. And unit charts also use this one stands for many idea when their creators aren't being theatrical, splurging tiny dots all over the place. Isotypes are not suitable for all types of data visualization. Pie charts? No. Scatter plots? No. And many, many more. No, no, no. Isotypes are basically horizontal bar charts made up of tiny pictures. The real value of the system is that, with the help of those pictures, the chart immediately signals what it's about, while at the same time allowing the reader to count the pictures. In other words, the charts are statistically accountable. That's another of Neurath's phrases. A considerable added benefit is that the pictorial aspect of isotype charts makes them approachable for non-specialist audiences. Many academics disapprove. A favorite isotype of mine is this chart of home and this chart of home and factory weaving in England from Neurath's seminal 1939 book, Modern Man in the Making. It shows how weaving shifted from almost total home production in 1820 to 100% factory production 60 years later. Neurath's team underlines the difference in home and factory work by color coding and the slightest touch of illustration. The chart was made in the 1930s and today can be criticized for depicting all the workers as male. It's the principle I'm pointing to here, not the apparent political correctness of some of the pictures. Gerd Arndts was the designer of most of the isotype symbols, and he is a major reason for the success of the system and for its continued influence today. His ability to make tiny symbols readable and human means they connect with audiences who can see real life in charts, such as this one about unemployment. Also from Modern Man in the Making. The Isotype core team, which was Otto Neurath, Marie Reidemeister, who later became Marie Neurath, and Gerd himself, and they helped the reader to add up the numbers more easily by arranging them into groups of 10. Just look at that slouching figure of a depressed worker. It's very simple, but to my mind, it's a miniature work of art. As well as making charts, Neurath used the isotype system on maps, like this one from Fortune Future Books. It was published in 1946, but still looks fresh today to me. And this map of flooding in on both of flooding and population on both sides of the Mississippi, also from Modern Man in the Making, shows how simple a map can be when the point is the data, not the exact geography. Now, sometimes Neurath did use abstract shapes, like this chart of pig iron production. This is an example, I think, of why modern unit charts are often called isotypes. Finally, here's a chart of simple squares to show the ratios of 5 food ingredients for making doughs and batters. The idea for the system is Michael Ruhlman's, a chef, and he says, a recipe isn't a simple list of ingredients, a list of quantities, but rather it's a list of one quantity relative to several others. Whether you're baking 10 cookies or 100, color-coded squares allow you to make any amount of dough or batter with the right proportion of ingredients.
And thanks for that amazing review of the isotype chart, the unit chart, and the icon chart. I hope you'll take a sort of different perspective, a different way to think about creating those different graph and chart types in your own work. So this has been the One Chart at a Time video series. Please come back tomorrow for yet another video on how to compare categories in your data.